N'Golo Kanté was not a man of many troubles. Discreet, hard-working, and possessing a rare humility, he liked to live his life simply. But a few months ago, an unexpected incident turned his routine upside down. That afternoon was just like any other. Kanté went to the bank to pay some bills. The agency was crowded, the line was long, and as always, he waited patiently. The heat inside made the wait even more exhausting, but he didn't complain. He remained calm, as he always did. Then it happened. An impatient woman, visibly irritated by the delay, started complaining loudly, grumbling that she couldn't waste her time there. Her frustration grew by the minute, and suddenly, without any apparent reason, she turned to Kanté and, with a furious expression, spat in his face. The place fell silent. The shock was palpable. Everyone saw the absurd scene, but Kanté, instead of reacting with anger, simply took a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his face without saying a word. "Aren't you going to say anything?" asked a man beside him, outraged by the aggression. But Kanté didn't respond. He just stayed in line, waiting for his turn to pay his bills, as if nothing had happened. However, the case didn't end there. Some witnesses, appalled by the incident, reported the aggression and insisted that Kanté press charges against the woman. Though reluctant, he eventually agreed to testify, and the situation reached the courts. But what no one expected was that the same woman, the one who had spat on him, would file a lawsuit against Kanté, claiming that he had intimidated her with his threatening presence in line. The news spread, leaving many perplexed. How could someone who had been the clear victim of such an evident aggression end up in court? How could a man who didn't even react be accused of anything? Now, after months of waiting, the day of the trial had finally arrived. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, curious spectators, and even some public figures had come to witness the trial. The case had gained attention due to its absurd nature. A man known for his kindness was being sued by the very person who had assaulted him months before. Kanté arrived at the courthouse with his usual discretion, dressed in a simple suit and carrying his characteristic calm demeanor. He showed no signs of anger or resentment. He only wished for everything to be resolved in the best possible way. The woman, on the other hand, seemed restless. Sitting beside her lawyer, she stared fixedly at the judge, avoiding any eye contact with Kanté. Her expression was tense, and from time to time, she murmured something under her breath. The judge opened the session, and the first witnesses were called. Bank employees, customers who had been in line, and even the security guard gave their testimonies. They all confirmed the same story. Kanté had been patiently waiting when the woman, without any apparent reason, spat in his face. He didn't react at all, one witness stated. He just took out a handkerchief and wiped his face. It was unbelievable. "And what about the accused's behavior?" the judge asked. "She was agitated, impatient. She kept cursing. When she spat, it seemed like she wanted to provoke a reaction from him." With each new testimony, the woman's expression changed. She went from irritated to anxious and then to something close to losing control. Her lawyer tried to intervene, but the witness's words were too strong to refute. Then it was Kanté's turn to speak. He stood up and walked to the center of the room. Before the judge could even ask a question, he calmly said, "I hold no grudges. That day, I was just surprised, but I don't hate her." The simplicity of his words carried more weight than any long speech. The judge nodded and began asking some questions. Kanté answered honestly, without exaggeration or dramatization. He simply recounted what had happened, never once trying to portray himself as a victim. By this point, the woman already looked uncomfortable. Her feet tapped nervously on the floor, she sighed heavily, and her eyes darted around the room, searching for something, perhaps an escape from the situation she had created. Then, something unexpected happened. When one of the last witnesses mentioned that the aggression had been completely unjustified, the woman suddenly exploded. "This is absurd!" she shouted, abruptly standing up. Everyone turned to her, surprised by her sudden outburst. The judge banged his gavel on the table, ordering her to calm down, but it was too late. "You're all against me! You think this man is a saint! You don't know anything about me!" she raged. Her face was red with anger, her breathing rapid. And then, without any warning, she spat again. This time, there was no doubt. In front of the judge, the lawyers, the witnesses, and the audience, the woman spat in Kanté's face for the second time. A deafening silence filled the room. The judge immediately ordered the court security officers to detain her. She tried to argue, claiming she had been provoked, but no one was willing to listen to her excuses anymore. The guards handcuffed her, and she was taken out of the room, now facing charges of contempt of court and assault. Kanté once again simply sighed and wiped his face with a handkerchief. He said nothing. He did not retaliate. He just stood there, watching everything unfold with the same serene expression as always. The courtroom was still in shock. What was supposed to be a simple hearing to clarify the facts had turned into a spectacle of fury and loss of control. The woman who had spat in Kanté's face months ago had done it again, but this time in front of a judge, lawyers, witnesses, and journalists. Her reckless outburst not only reinforced everything that had been said about her behavior, but also brought an immediate end to the trial. She was arrested on the spot with no chance of defending herself. Kanté, once again, remained unfazed. As the woman was escorted out of the courtroom, he simply watched with a look that held neither hatred nor resentment, just a quiet mix of compassion and sadness. The judge let out a deep sigh and adjusted himself in his seat. "Given what has just occurred," he said firmly, "and in light of the evidence presented, there is no doubt that the aggression against Mr. Kanté was real and repeated. The defendant will be immediately detained and will face charges not only for the initial incident, but also for contempt of court." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Some whispered about how the woman had managed to make things even worse for herself, while others speculated on what her final punishment would be. Then, Kanté stood up. "Excuse me, Your Honor," he said calmly. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Yes, Mr. Kanté?" Kanté took a deep breath before speaking. "I would like to withdraw the charges." Silence filled the room. People exchanged confused glances. Even the judge took a few seconds to process what he had just heard. "Are you certain about this?" he asked, his tone a mix of surprise and disbelief. Kanté nodded. "Yes, I believe people can change, and I would rather let this end here." The judge placed his hands on the table and looked at him intently. "Mr. Kanté, the defendant has clearly demonstrated a pattern of aggressive behavior. Even so, you wish to drop the charges?" He nodded again. "She is already facing the consequences of her actions. Everyone saw what happened. She lost control and revealed her anger to the world. I don't need her to be in prison to know that justice has been served." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. Lawyers whispered among themselves, journalists scribbled down every word. It was rare, if not almost unheard of, to see someone act with such generosity in the face of such blatant wrongdoing. The judge, after a few moments of reflection, banged his gavel. "In that case, I accept your decision. The charges are dropped. The defendant will be released. Case dismissed." The audience didn't know how to react. Some were in awe, others frustrated, but everyone agreed on one thing. N'Golo Kanté was different. When the woman was brought back into the courtroom, no longer in handcuffs, she looked bewildered. She had expected to be taken to prison, expected that her impulsive act had sealed her fate. But instead, she was told that she was free to go. She looked at Kanté, unsure of what to say. For a moment, it seemed like she would try to justify her actions. But then, something changed in her eyes. Regret. Kanté simply gave her a small smile and nodded, as if to say that everything was all right. The woman lowered her gaze and left the courtroom without a word. Outside, journalists swarmed around Kanté, asking why he had made such a decision. He simply answered with his usual humility, "If we don't believe people can change, then what's the point of all this?" And without waiting for more questions, he walked away, as serene as ever. Because N'Golo Kanté knew that true kindness doesn't need to be announced, it simply exists.